My name is Michael Rasario with inspiredtoeducate.net. We're passionate about helping students love learning through making, tinkering, and engineering. And my contact information and Twitter handle is there. If you're local, we would also welcome you to GDG Central Florida. You can check us out at gdgcentralflorida.org. And I'm a co-organizer with that community, and we would love to have a conversation with you. So today we're going to just go through some motivations of why you should care about WebVR. We're web developers, so I think we have a very special place in advancing the conversation on virtual reality and augmented reality. We're going to, of course, look at some code and also kind of speculate about what the features kind of look like, and then kind of close with answering some of your questions. So a little bit of background about me. First off, I'm a web developer, first and foremost, technologist, but in my last 2 years, I've had the opportunity to kind of do some research for Air Force Research Laboratory with a small engineering firm called Mercer Engineering Research Center. And we got to work for the research laboratory to answer the question, so if we gave excellent devices to aircraft maintenance, what would that look like and how would it change their workflow? So you can see I'm wearing Microsoft HoloLens. That was one of the first devices that we got to really enjoy and play with and build. You can see my first Hello World program. I'm a Star Trek geek. So of course I had to put the Enterprise in my workspace. We also looked at the ODG R7, which is basically sunglasses, but it's an Android device that you wear on your head. So kind of back to the Inspired to Educate story. I'm really passionate in my spare time of helping makers young and old have a great encounter with learning to code, or learning to do kind of like engineering and whatnot. So if you think about like how you started your journey as a technologist, someone was that spark who helped push you forward. So to a certain extent, we're excited about doing that for makers young and old. So you can see here, we actually helped start a makerspace in Middle Georgia. We were the first makerspace born out of Central Georgia called Spark Makin', and this is a 3D modeling class that my son actually got to attend. He's sitting in the back there, the orange shirt, and he's learning how to make 3D content. As opposed to just playing games, our dream is that like students kind of fall in love with the art of making games themselves. And doing this, I mean, he was like 6 at that point, right? So he has a new perspective on not being a consumer of technology, but a maker technology. So this sort of idea of being able to play with technology or creating an environment for technology makers started kind of like in the 1960s with a thinker called Seymour Papert. Seymour Papert is one of the founders of the MIT Media Lab, and he did groundbreaking work in artificial intelligence and machine learning, but he also had a big heart for getting young people excited and helping them fall in love with mathematics, because he loved mathematics. But he felt like the lecture story was kind of killing people's engagement with math. And he wanted to give young people a kind of playground to draw with mathematics. And you know, on an Apple IIe, this is one of my first encounters with programming. So Seymour Papert, he really cared about like creating an environment for learning and tinkering. So I started thinking about, hey, virtual reality is a really, really, really big environment. What if we empowered students to do that? So kind of in honor of him, I kind of put together this small little Python DSL called Bot Draw, where you can instantiate a bot and do things that you might do in Logo, but do it in 3D. So, and we kind of build these sorts of kind of like fun experiences, and they're all, you know, a middle schooler could do these sorts of things. So in searching how to implement this technology, I looked through 3JS, Babylon.js, a variety of different frameworks, and I kind of fell in love with A-Frame. Here's why. Like, you know, if you look on boilerplate for 3JS or for WebVR, you might see something like this. Hundreds of lines just to get started. Now, I've done this, it's cool, but how do we empower more people and web developers to care and enjoy the art of making 3D stuff? So some very, very clever folks at Mozilla have been thinking about this problem from the ground up, from the WebVR stack all the way up to let's make this more engaging. And so you can see here, you can probably glance at that code, and as web developers go like, I understand that. I'm just taking in a JavaScript dependency at the top, and then I'm describing the scene using tags. So I have a scene, a box, a sphere, cylinder, and kind of using the beautiful metaphors of web components that we now have, describing a 3D scene. So in terms of technology stack, Mozilla really cared about trying to reach the widest audience possible. So whether you love jQuery or you love Vue or Angular or anything at the top, there's nothing in this framework that precludes your decision of JavaScript framework. They wanted to encourage the adoption of open standards and the DOM thinking that we all probably have. They've embraced a really nice component model, which we're going to get into, which has spawned a really remarkable ecosystem. But they're also kind of building upon another marvelous library called 3JS, which kind of abstracts you away from the lower level understanding of WebGL or WebVR. What's kind of nice, though, is by the construction of the system, if you really want to do some shader technology, or if you need to do some lower level things, all that's still possible. A-Frame is really a companion technology to 3JS. So one piece I want to kind of call out that's neat is the entity component system. So you could architect the system with lots of inheritance. They decided not to go that way. You see this pattern actually in Unity. How many Unity developers do we have okay, one? Okay. So really what this, in Unity, or in this system, you have this identity, this idea of components, which are decorated onto various entities. So like in Unity, like you have the game object and you decorate mono behaviors, right? That's the analogy. So let's take an abstract example. Like let's say you have a ball. A ball in a game might be composed of position, velocity, physics, geometry, material, and there's a few other examples there. So this is kind of what a tag looks like. I'm going to switch slides real fast. So you can start out with an entity and then add on behaviors like geometry, material, position. A-Frame does support sort of things like animation and movement. Some of my friends who have backgrounds in Flash, they said, wow, that looks really familiar. I feel like I remember doing that when I was doing Flash. So out of the box, you get all of these kind of core ideas: position, rotation, some hand controllers, cursor raycasting. And the community has really, really embraced this. This is a very young framework. It's maybe less than 2 years old. And so they have really cool components for physics, for audio visualization, different types of 3D models. So if you kind of Google for the A-Frame registry, they have a very excellent collection of curated content for you to check out. And again, it's just this simple to be able to start with a simple idea of an entity and then decorate just a little bit of components onto there. And that's a leap hand motion controller ready to go. So here we have also a simple scene, and I can kind of move around in it, move backwards and forwards. But just as web developers, as we're learning new technology, you want to view source, right? So they decided in this framework they wanted to be able to give a good inspector for this technology. So just doing Control-Alt-I, I now can look into this scene and even tinker with it. So it's really great that you can kind of like be able to play as you normally would as a web developer in the declarative markup and tags, but you can kind of jump into another view to make small tweaks or do some experimentations or change some properties and all that. So what are people doing with this? So we've seen native technologies like the Vive be able to do art and whatnot. So Vive is a technology that A-Frame can speak to, so people are kind of like building art with it in 3D. So digital storytelling is a fantastic narrative. So part of what Mozilla cares about is being able to empower people to tell excellent stories. So being able to take people and be very immersive in that story is awesome. Being able to kind of engage people in conversations on science. So this is some work of the Washington Post, taking people to Mars. My kids would probably love playing this little artful game here for city building. There's some interesting collaborations between the D3JS community and A-Frame exploring data visualization in 3D and VR. Small gaming experiences. You're not going to build Call of Duty in this, let's be realistic, but your little small experiences are kind of cool. Here's another kind of data visualization / math engagement tool where this is basically a graphing calculator. You know, I remember playing with the TI-81, you know, in school, and that's way more fun than my TI-81. So by collaborating with other people working in AR, they have made connectors so that you can make augmented reality experiences using tracker-based AR. So there's a little piece of paper that has a hero marker on it, and so 3D content can be decorated on top of that marker. Real estate is definitely a neat use case to consider. So this is work from 3D.io. So I can kind of just, maybe I'm inspecting a new office that I'm going to, you know, potentially authorize to build or whatnot. I can kind of inspect the design and see if I like it. And of course, like the education pieces definitely excite me in terms of giving students more manipulatives, something very concrete and real that they can see and interact with. So here, this is a nice piece demoing future learning tools in the medical context. So you can see they have a good amount of engagement in terms of contributions, and hundreds of projects are in flight. So another kind of small piece that it's good to call out is how many people play with Firebase in the room? Okay, so if you have Firebase skills, challenge you to definitely like play with this technology and make something cool. It was mentioned in one of the other VR talks today that there's a common problem of isolation where I'm building an experience and it's, you know, just for me. I think web developers have a unique opportunity to build engaging experiences, and kind of connecting A-Frame to Firebase is the secret sauce that would make that happen. So engineering, science, visualization, art are all kind of cool things. These are just some of the core devices that A-Frame works on. Everything from down to a Google Cardboard, up to the mixed reality headsets. I will confess that the mixed reality headsets is still a little buggy, but I can see Microsoft quickly iterating to improve their implementations of WebVR and Edge. But that's definitely very exciting. Vive looks like works very, very well, and of course Oculus. But I would also kind of challenge you to look at the explosion of devices that are going on. At Google I/O, Google announced standalone headsets with multiple partners, similar announcements from Microsoft. So I think we're at a neat hinge moment to really launch and innovate, and A-Frame is a great way to start. So in terms of loading 3D models, it's very, very simple. What's a 3D model? So like if you're playing Pokemon Go or whatever, and you have that little character, right? So it's pretty easy to load up and what is called an OBJ file. It's composed of two pieces, maybe like the actual OBJ file and material. And under the assets tags, you can describe those objects and material. Other 3D formats supported include Collada, GLTF, and whatnot. The augmented reality example that I showed is really that simple. So it's a slight elaboration. So we have the same content that we had before, pointing to some OBJ files. We just took on another dependency for A-Frame-ARJS, a little bit of configuration, and we're configuring a few components on the scene to move that forward. Loading images is also just that simple. Links are very simple, as you can see too. I would, again, challenge this audience to kind of play with this technology. And if you think about Wikipedia and how it's interconnected by links, hyperlinks, right? This is bread and butter stuff that we take for granted as web developers. I think web developers have the opportunity to build the biggest augmented and virtual reality experiences, because we're all about creating these open, interconnected stories together. It's something that's very unique to our brand of web development. So if you do care about thinking in terms of DOM, a lot of the metaphors that you think of in DOM manipulation do work in terms of creating elements and searching and setting attributes. All those styles of thinking are still honored. So with that, we're going to look at just a few demos. Okay, well, let's start with a little physics example. So you would expect to see two cubes there and a floor somewhere in the code. So let's jump into the code and see what that looks like. So at the top here, we've taken on a dependency for A-frame, minified a physics dependency. And on the scene, we add our physics component. And we simply say that this is a dynamic body. Pretty simple. And if you wanted to declare that certain entities are static, you simply use the static body component. Let's talk about simple behavior. So let's say I want to, make kind of an object go up and down and whatnot. Very similar story. We'll additionally just make another object bounce like the cylinder. So I just love that I can make quick changes to my markup and refresh. That's an ordinary thing that we love as web developers, as opposed to compiling in Unity, deploying to Visual Studio, then doing another 4-minute cycle to get an experience onto the device. So I think the designers definitely looked at Unity in terms of their metaphors to a certain extent. So in this A-frame component that we're going to create, you register a component, we called it bounce, and there's a very simple interface you can implement for initialization and time tick. So under initialization, we're setting a speed, we're initializing a Y factor, and we're kind of capturing the X and Z component. So to figure out where we are, what component we're talking about, we're saying this.el. And then tick gets executed, kind of related to the game loop, but it's executed often. So we simply change the direction by the speed. And that's all pretty nice and simple. Okay, the final demo I wanted to show is kind of an homage to something my kids love to play with. How many parents play Minecraft with their kids or play Minecraft? Okay, a few. Okay, nice. So Kevin Enjo, he's one of the creators of A-frame. They actually have on aframe.io, if you wanted to follow along or play with it yourself, you can go down to the docs, and I'm basically kind of, in a very quick fashion, stepping through this tutorial, building a Minecraft demo. So I can move around this world. I can lay down blocks. You'll notice there's this little red rectangle in the center. That's called a cursor. And it's, kind of doing what you would expect. So as I'm moving around and I'm looking at this object, I can raycast out from my perspective and hit an object, and then it's doing a little bit of rounding math to kind of orient the blocks onto a grid. So let's look at that in detail code-wise. So from a markup perspective, we've already talked about all of the elements. We have a scene. That scene has assets. There are 2 images being loaded into memory, the floor, the sky. Here we have a camera having a cursor, and it's currently red. We have a cylinder for the ground. There's actually a tag for the sky that we defined. And then this is kind of another interesting concept. For people who do Unity, you're familiar with the idea of prefabs, the idea of being able to layer on lots of behaviors onto an object and give it a name. This is really the same idea called a mix-in. So they've said this will have geometry and material and this other behavior called random color, and this other behavior called snap, which we haven't defined yet. But it just has all those behaviors, and we're going to give all that aggregation of behaviors a name called voxel. And that's using the mixin concept. So if we look at the JavaScript, kind of at the very top, we have our component for random color. And it's doing what you might expect, setting an attribute for the material color, and it's getting a random color. Not going to talk through this too much, but the snap component is doing the proper rounding required to orient bricks onto a grid using floor functions. You can see most of the work is being done in the update method there. And here we're just doing on key down. When I press the space bar, I find out where my cursor is in the DOM and grab onto a reference for it, grab onto some of its data. So when I'm doing a raycast, let's say I'm raycasting and I'm about to place an object on here, I'm pretty much shooting out this like imaginary line to hit this thing, and then there's of course a 3D point associated with that. So that point in this code shows up pretty much on this line. So we've discovered in 3D space where that point is. And at that point, we can instantiate a new entity, give its position, and decorate on the mixin called voxel. And then we simply append it to the scene. So those are all the really kind of cool taste of what it's like to program in A-frame. Does that feel approachable to you, most everyone? Hopefully it's kind of like brain candy. I mean, often we're doing line and business apps, so I find this actually very refreshing, being able to do a completely different type of programming. So let's just close out with like a few remarks about the future. So there's many more web developers out in the world than there are people who are maybe doing like native VR. So I think it's really interesting for us to think about as a community, what story do we want to tell to make a difference in the world as web developers using this technology? There's a lot more of us, and our culture as web developers is about openness, linking to each other. Those are all kind of really wonderful things that we care about and promote. As web developers, we also don't live in App Store. That's kind of cool. There's this really big surface of engagement that doesn't require permission, where I don't have to go to the Windows App Store and download this experience and wait for downloads. I don't have to go to the Apple App Store. You know, it's just the web. It's just a web page. I think the model of being able just to kind of code and test rapidly, as we usually do as web developers, is notable, and I know many vendors are trying to improve that. We see vendors thinking about how to put VR to work or create new models for VR. So I've had the opportunity to play with the HP mixed reality headset from Microsoft. And so far their virtual reality desktop is something at least to look at. It's very neat that all of my Windows 10 apps are now accessible in this virtual reality world, which is actually a really interesting feat when you think about things like media just work. Microsoft Edge works, Chrome works. It's really quite interesting seeing all that's possible there, and there are companies kind of thinking about how do we use VR for things that it's not usually thought of. And usually if you think about VR, you're thinking about entertainment and gaming scenarios. So I like that Microsoft and others are kind of challenging the paradigm. And they have been iterating with other partners to make sure that A-Frame and WebVR works well in their experiences. Location is going to continue to be an interesting new sensor that we as developers will be able to play with. So if we think about, in academic research, we call this simultaneous location and mapping, or SLAM. So, and there's several terms in media when we talk about this. So Google would call this, under the brand of Project Tango. They have a 6 degree of freedom set of sensors on their devices that enable you to track, where am I in this 3D space? Where is this device in 3D space? And how do I create engaging content relative to that location? Microsoft kind of speaks about this in the terms of Windows holographic or mixed reality. If you also look at Google's more recent work with AR Core, you can now leverage a newer SLAM technology that they've released to try to just use the web camera on your phone and give a very robust sense of where you are in space. I sense that they're using feature detection plus surface detection, which I thought was kind of a new fun thing. And so that combination is creating a SLAM implementation that's surprisingly stable. Apple has their own kind of stories around that in AR Core. So, okay, so there's lots of people thinking about this problem, trying to give you the gift of, where's my device? What are you going to do with it? Some early thinkers are combining A-Frame with experimental builds of Chrome so that you can play with AR Core in combination with A-Frame concepts. Some other companies, including MetaVision, and their product is the Meta 2, they're giving a wider frame of view than the HoloLens, so that makes a lot of people in the industry happy. They have a neat critique of the Microsoft HoloLens in that Microsoft has created this kind of like mouse metaphor. This is how I play with 3D objects. It's the metaphor of the mouse, a 2D sort of thought, right? If we watch Iron Man or the visionary movies, like Tony Stark reaches out for the car and then pushes it, or he takes a graphic of an amusement park and just pulls it apart. There's so many things that just by our biology we're used to being able to do to physical things in terms of just being able to push it around. Wouldn't it be cool if you could interact with 3D stuff in the exact same way? So this is the MetaVision company is thinking about a lot of those programming metaphors for gestures. I think that's going to be a very interesting place for research and development in the future, and I'm certain that they're going to try to make it accessible to developers like us. I guess with that, I do want to say if you have more intrigue or want to explore the space more, definitely check out aframe.io. Definitely give a lot of thanks to Mozilla and the creators of A-Frame. They did a great job in kind of fostering and bootstrapping this community. I've also put together a blog post on inspiredtoeducate.net for some repos and different links that would help you get started with this technology. And if you're local, we would love to continue the conversation in GDG Central Florida. Definitely would love to maybe see some of you build things with virtual reality or augmented reality and come talk and share. Well, definitely thank you very much for your attention. And I would challenge you to, again, think about the difference you want to make in the world. Think about the stories that you want to enable. How do you want to have fun with your kids? Hopefully you take this A-Frame stuff and you can make something cool and share it on the web. Thank you very much.